All right. Hi, everyone. I have 4 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and get started. Hi, I'm Nikki Robinson. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Today, I'm going to be talking about complexity, and specifically complexity when it comes to security tooling. So let's get started. Oh, maybe. There we go. So first up, all thoughts, feelings, beliefs are my own. They do not reflect my employer's. Now that that's out of the way. So by day, I'm a security architect at IBM. I worked on the CISO remediation team, so I do everything from incident response, vulnerability management, everything in between. I'm also a professor of practice at Capital Technology University, so I teach research and design. So I'm also an ICIT fellow for this year, 2022 to 2023. I also recently wrote a book called Mind the Tech Gap, which was really fun. And some of that, it's the blend of IT, cybersecurity, and human factors, which, shock, I'll give you like a little preview I'm going to be talking about today. I also co-host the Resilient Cyber podcast with my good friend Chris Hughes on LinkedIn Live. I have a DSc in cybersecurity and PhD in human factors. And one of the reasons why this topic I've really wanted to talk about for a long time is because of my research in human factors and in psychology. So that research really led me heavily into lots of different areas in cybersecurity, very specifically how quickly things get complex and how difficult it can be to manage environments. So I wouldn't be a good researcher if I didn't start with my problem statement, so I'll start there. But then I want to talk about how we got here. How did we get to this place of complexity in our security tooling environments? And not just security tooling, but it's sort of cybersecurity programs in general. There's a lot of complexity when it comes to our programs, whether you're on a small cybersecurity team, whether you're an IT professional that's also the cybersecurity team, or working in a large organization. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means in regards to human factors, and then hopefully providing some good feedback, some good things to take back either to your own organizations or your own teams or your own tools to try to see if you have some complexity in your environment and maybe see if you can reduce some of that and improve efficiency of some of the security tools that you might have in your own environments. And then I'm going to introduce cybersecurity tooling a maturity model, sort of, especially for smaller to medium-sized businesses where it can be really difficult to try to determine what do you even need in your environment, what do you need to sort of go forward and make sure you're getting the right picture. So I'll introduce that near the end. Okay, so why are cybersecurity environments so complex and why tooling specifically is so complex? It's really no secret a lot of environments are moving to cloud or using hybrid cloud environments. They might be using, AWS and Azure or AWS and GCP, as well as managing on-premise systems too. They may still have PII or IP that they want to keep on-premise or specific environments, legacy environments. Maybe they're not ready to move to the cloud. So that problem statement alone of having cloud environments and integrating that into your organization starts to add complexity. That's where that picture sort of starts. Because when you're managing one environment, it's pretty easy to sort of say, okay, this is what I've got. I think I know what I need. Let me go from there. But once you're managing multiple environments simultaneously, especially if you're a small team, if you're a developer with complex development environments, it becomes really difficult to start to get that picture of what you actually have and then what do you need. And then it starts to be, okay, well, do we also need this tool? Do we also need that? Am I actually seeing all the vulnerabilities in my environment? Am I not? So those questions start to come up, and that's when new tools come into play or, hey, let's rip and replace. Let's rip out a tool and put a new one in place that may or may not solve the problem. IT and cybersecurity professionals overwhelmed. I think, especially as a security practitioner, I can say this from my vantage point too, there's a lot we have to look at, and not just a lot we have to know, right? There's certifications and education, but when it comes to security tooling, the things that we need to do our jobs, whether you're in a SOC or you're doing incident response or digital forensics, chances are you're using, I would say, maybe 5 tools minimum, probably a lot more than that. And it's also possible that there are other tools in the environment that maybe other team members are leveraging for the same thing, but they're seeing a different picture than you. So they might be leveraging other tools, seeing a different picture, but you have to come together and figure out, wait, did you find this vulnerability? Did you find this? So security tool sprawl becomes not just a problem for managing the environment, because you have to do upkeep on those tools, but it also can potentially increase the attack surface too. All of these tools need access to other things. So not only do you have this connectivity between devices in cloud environments, but then if you're providing administrative access or opening ports or providing additional access to these security tools that are containing all this information, SolarWinds, anyone? It becomes this big pile of information that, if compromised, could be pretty detrimental to the environment too. And then I just wanted to hit on a couple of buzzwords: digital transformation and zero trust. There's zero trust tools now. There's tools for lots of different reasons, and it's not to say that one tool will fix everything, because I think now we need lots of tools to do our jobs. We need lots of tools to see the entire environment. I'm going to get into that in a second. Complexity and depth. So I wanted to take that down a level, just from multi-cloud environments to anyone that's managing legacy systems and new systems, or had to potentially even pull legacy applications or legacy OS into cloud environments, and are probably in transition to using newer or supported OS and application levels. So now not only are you managing multiple cloud environments, or potentially a cloud environment and on-prem, but you may also be supporting multiple OS levels, multiple application levels. That adds to that complexity. It takes you down another level of, oh, we're not just supporting or looking at vulnerabilities for RHEL 7 anymore. We're looking for RHEL 7 and RHEL 8. I need to make sure my patch management tools, I need to make sure my vulnerability management scanning, that I'm seeing vulnerabilities for both. But now, instead of having eyes on maybe one OS level, I have to have it on 2, 3, 4, 5 different levels. Complex development environments. If you have anyone that's running a development environment, you probably have prod, dev, and test. You may have other environments too. You might have a sandbox. You might have other areas that are specific for different types of applications. And so those amount of environments continue to grow. So when we're talking about security tooling, not only do we need a window into those systems, but we need to then parse that information and see it at lots of different application OS and other levels too. So it becomes really complex really quickly. And then looking at user accounts versus business accounts. Did someone open maybe a cloud account on their own for the business? Maybe they're running some sort of environment in there, but then there's also business accounts that they're using for other things. So now you've got lots of cloud accounts that you're managing across lots of different areas that you need to have visibility into, and you may or may not. So this migration, when we're talking about digital transformation, it's not really just digital transformation. It's really, we're changing the way that we manage environments. It's not like we just need a vulnerability scanner and maybe antivirus or EDR. We need a lot of different tools now. We need, which I'll get into in a second, but talking about SAST, DAST. We're talking about pipelines now, CI/CD pipelines. There's a lot of additional components and things that we need to be able to see. Logging is still a problem, because now we have all this data, but how do you parse it? Do you need to get another tool to be able to actually parse this information that you have? So that's where the problem started to happen. We saw a need for new types of tools, different types of tools, to help give us a better picture into our environments. Because we need that data. We need to see what's going on. And if we can't get into these multiple environments, it makes it more difficult. Hence another tool or another tool. If you have AWS and Azure, you may need to have separate security tools or separate security tool solutions for each environment that might play in their own cloud environment. But that means 2 sets of cloud security toolings solutions that you're managing at the same time. The needs of business are changing so quickly. I mean, we've all seen how quickly development is taking over a lot of what we do. There are a lot more DevOps and DevSecOps environments. The way that we managed legacy IT infrastructure is very different from how we do it now. And some of that means that the original security tooling that we had in place is a good start, but now we have to integrate other tools, probably open source tools, other things to help give us that picture. And then I highlighted shadow IT and legacy systems because I think those are the bane of all cybersecurity problems. But especially when it comes to security tooling, it becomes really difficult when you're trying to focus on what tools do I need to see in these new environments, these new application and dev environments versus how am I still looking at, I hope not, but server 2008 or 2013 or 2012, how am I actually seeing vulnerabilities on these systems, and do I need to continue looking at them while I'm also trying to figure out how to manage infrastructure as code? So it's two different sets of problems that we're trying to solve with lots of different tools. So I wanted to take it back up a level because security tooling can mean lots of different things. It could be everything from, looking at a vulnerability scanner to what do I need to look at for IAM? How do I look at my different policies for user accounts? Because those are vulnerabilities too. If I don't have any sort of least privilege in place, or how do I actually get a picture into what's going on with my accounts and account management? So managing current infrastructure while also trying to tune and manage tools for current threats, current IOCs, indicators of compromise, trying to look at specific threats or specific IOCs for your own business or your own domain. It can be really difficult to manage that current security tooling infrastructure while also trying to constantly tune, looking at alerts, tune alerts. So it just becomes increasingly difficult to manage. The other is I wanted to bring up, because when a business is evaluating security tools, the business leaders may be looking at security tools for a different reason. They might be looking at it for what kind of reporting capability does it give me? What kind of visibility can I see quickly? What kind of graphics can I see? What kind of reports can I get? Versus, security tools that we might use as practitioners to help us get a better picture of what's actually going on. And we need a different view than a business leader would. So how do we get the right tools to help make sure that our business leaders, executives, and directors are getting the right information they need, while also giving us practitioners the right information to be able to remediate vulnerabilities, to find them, and hopefully hone that information going forward. And then integrating threat intelligence. That's a big, it's a big step for a lot of small organizations to integrate threat intelligence, but it's becoming more and more important to integrate those types of tools, that type of intel, maybe even a program into an organization, so that you're getting more context into your own environment instead of saying, okay, I've got 10,000 vulnerabilities. What do I do with them? What's most important? How do I prioritize? And that's really the most important piece of this, is that how do I get the right information so that I can prioritize? Because there are so many vulnerabilities released every day, whether they're have scores or not, whether they have patches available or configurations available to actually remediate them. But that adds another additional layer of complexity that I'll be getting to in a second too. But it adds to that picture of, okay, I need to see all these vulnerabilities, but now that I have all this data, how do I prioritize it? What am I going to do with it? Which takes me to vulnerability scoring. So I did both my DSC and PhD around vulnerability chaining and vulnerability scoring, mostly because I think it's a really interesting topic, but also because vulnerability management can be a really complex topic. And for a lot of IT teams or development teams, you don't have a ton of time to sit and worry about what does a 9 versus a 10 mean, and what do I fix first? If I have 5,000 critical vulnerabilities, what does that mean to me? I can't remediate them all. What do I do first? So that's one of the reasons why I think this is a good one to sort of dive deep on, because this is just one area of security tooling, and really one area of one type of security tool, to sort of highlight how complex this can get when you start to dig into what does this information actually mean when I'm getting so much information from so many different tool sets. So we have now for vulnerability scoring, which is great, by the way. We have a lot of information. It's great. We have CVSS is a place to start. It gives us an initial score, but it doesn't provide a lot of context. It gives us a sort of a baseline. But like I said, when you're in an environment, you have 10,000 critical vulnerabilities, where do you start? Now we have the exploit prediction scoring system, or EPSS, which again is great. It's another enhanced, gives us an enhanced way to look at a vulnerability is a critical or a medium or low. Is it exploitable? If it's exploitable, okay, should I remediate that first? Probably. If it's externally facing, should I fix that first? Yeah, probably. But that helps give you that picture then to sort of whittle down just from a CVSS score. But now we also have the KEV, another great tool available to us, known exploited vulnerabilities. Now we have a really great open source library of known exploited vulnerabilities. That's awesome. Now I can take this information and add even more context into how I prioritize vulnerability management and remediation. But depending on the tooling that you're using, there are other great product tools that provide scoring or maybe enhanced context, like the Tenable VPR, the Vulnerability Priority Rating, which again is like a heat map, and it helps show you where you probably want to focus your remediation efforts. But now we've got heat maps, we've got lots of different scores, we've got open source libraries that we need to look at to see if this information is applicable, and then we need to have the context of our own environments, where we're probably managing multiple patch levels. We probably have risks that we've accepted for certain things. Certain ports have to be open. Okay, but now I've got externally facing versus internal systems. Now I've got PII or PHI if you're in the healthcare industry, and items that can't be remediated. So all of those layers, all of those individual pieces start to stack up into building this picture, and it's literally just to ask the question, should I remediate this first? That's it. It has nothing to do with threat intelligence or anything like that. And so once you start adding all these other security tooling, EDR, and all these other components into that picture, it becomes a lot of information really quickly. And I know that once you're managing 10, 15 different tools, it sort of becomes, okay, I've got vulnerabilities in 10 different dashboards. Am I getting the right information? Is this tool showing me something that this tool isn't? So it can become really confusing really quickly. So I wanted to give just sort of a glimpse of security tooling landscape. This is by no means a complete picture because it's changing all the time and we need to see different information all the time, especially as I think development environments continue to get more complex and more mature. We're using lots of different types of tools and ways of building code like without infrastructure or without as much infrastructure, having to manage operating systems, things like that, that will hopefully help at least some of the infrastructure management component when it comes to vulnerability management. But when we're looking at security tools and starting to look at security tool sprawl, it starts to become this, okay, I need EDR because I need active monitoring, but maybe I'm not convinced that I'm getting a full picture from this EDR tool. I want to also add some specific type of malware analysis or detection, or I want to look for something else specifically. I used to use Malwarebytes in combination with other things. So it's not unusual to have one or two different solutions just for one of these areas. Logging. Any complex environment or any environment where you have multiple administrators or multiple developers, hopefully you have logging coming to one place, but it's also possible that you could have logging going to a couple different places. You might have a couple different solutions for logging tools. Hopefully not, because that would be really complex, but it certainly happens. And then when we start to add in the picture of asset management, configuration management, risk management, how are you actually managing if you have open risks or you have items that you can't remediate? Are you storing them somewhere? Are you saving them in a database, or are you keeping them in a list somewhere? And then when you're adding in incident response forensics, if you have a small team, if you have a big team and they're doing their own forensics work, you probably won't have to worry as much about the sort of forensic tool landscape. But if you have smaller teams where you have to have all these tools in one environment, it can become really difficult to manage them all at the same time. And not just the amount of information that's coming in, but something as simple as, oh, did I update that? Am I using the latest version of Ncase? Or is my Tenable Nessus scanner up to date? So it's not just the actual seeing the data that you're getting and configuring the information to get the right picture, but it's also the management and infrastructure of those tools. Okay, so I'm going to hop out of technical for a second and hop into human factors and some of the psychological things that I think are just as important about talking about the technical complexities of security tooling. When you're managing 10, 15, 20 different security tools, I start to think about mental workloads. Not just managing the infrastructure, managing the data, you're probably reporting on that data, and you're probably making decisions about that data. So that might be just one piece of your job too. So if you're like me, if you're like a security architect or if you're a security engineer and you're managing lots of different tools, you're probably not just doing that. You might be doing incident response. You might be looking at SOC alerts or working with the SOC if something happens as like an escalation point. You might be working with management, providing reporting and data. So you have to be able to ingest all this information and be able to pull it out to the right people and giving them the right context. That is a lot of information to take in and to make actionable decisions on. And I would say security people are really great at doing that. But it's also, I think, one of the reasons why we see a lot of burnout in SOCs and, in cybersecurity in general. We have a ton of information we have to take in all the time, make decisions, and get it right. We can't get it wrong in cybersecurity, because if we get it wrong, we might miss something. An incident could happen, something could go wrong. So it's really important that when we get that information that we act on it properly. Context switching. This is one of those things that I know we do this all the time outside of cybersecurity, right? You go from one app to another. You go from one tool to another. You're looking at let's say you're looking at EDR, and you're looking at different types of alerts and things like that, and you're like, oh, let me see, that vulnerability report was coming in, that should be done right now, let me go look at that, and then you go look at the vulnerability report, and then you're looking at email, and then you're looking at Slack, and then you're looking at Facebook. I mean, how do you have the time? But context switching essentially means that you could be missing things, right? I could be missing a really important Facebook post if I'm constantly looking at EDR all the time. No, but it can be a lot when you're context switching to potentially miss something. And if you're missing something that could be like an alert in EDR, that could be malware, or maybe you're not quite sure, but I don't really have time because I also have this report that's due at 3 p.m. and I have to send that in. It could be missing something that could then turn into an incident. So it's really important for us when we're context switching to not miss something. And it's more about, I think, awareness of what context switching can mean and how difficult it can be when we're doing this all the time. Metacognition. This is my favorite psychology word. I love this concept too, because metacognition is how we think about thinking. It's really just meta. But how do we think about thinking? How do we make decisions? If I made a decision, how do I go back and look at that decision and determine that I made the right decision? How do I determine that I had the right information at the right time? If I've got 15 different security tools, I probably have the right information, but did I have time or the right rule sets or the right configuration in place to be able to get the right information to make that right decision? And if I make a wrong decision, can I go back and look at that and say, do I need to tune this security tool to help me get the right picture next time? So metacognition, again, it's one of those things that I think it's important for us as security practitioners to get time to be able to go back and say, do I have the right picture? Did I make the right decision there based on the information I had at the time? Or could I have made a better decision if I had tuned this tool in a different way? So thinking about it that way. Perception, and I'm going to talk about this again. You'll probably hear me say this like 4 times. But perception. My perception is that this tool doesn't work. We need to get rid of it. It's not working, and so we're going to rip and replace. Ripping and replace tooling means, especially for the people that are doing it, not only do you have to completely decommission any systems that were managing that or supporting that. If you had vulnerability scanners, you've got to pull all that out. Now you've got to bring in an entirely new tool, set up a brand new infrastructure, and configure it. All of that configuration time adds, again, additional time, additional complexity. You could be missing something because you're also trying to decom the old systems and bring new systems online, because in the time that you're ripping and replacing, you could be missing data. And you might have to do both at the same time. You might have to manage both tools at the same time while you're bringing the new one online. Again, that adds to complexity and time spent on one security tool problem versus maybe the security tool landscape where you've got 10 or 15. So perception. My perception is that this tool doesn't work. Is that reality? Is that really true? Or is it that we haven't had time to properly configure this tool because we've got 50 other tools that we're managing, and I haven't had time to configure this tool in the depth that it could? I think of things like Splunk. That tool can take a ton of time for configuring rules, for configuring alerting, but it works really well, and it can work really well. And there's lots of tools like that when you can spend the time to really configure them properly, they can work really, really well. But a lot of times, we don't have the time to sit down and configure a tool to even 50% or 60% of what it could possibly do. So we end up not with the full picture we could have, and then maybe to management or executive management, it looks like, well, but we're not getting the right information, or I'm not getting enough information. This tool isn't working, and maybe that's just perception. Maybe it's reality, but maybe it's just perception. IT versus business versus cybersecurity. So this is the whole reason I wrote the book, because we all need a different picture. We all need to see something a little bit different to provide context. We all have different goals. IT or development, they might have SLAs. They may have, if they're working in Agile, maybe they have 2-week sprints that they're really worried about. In cybersecurity, we're worried about the next IOC or the next exploitable vulnerability and how that may impact those teams. And so sometimes those are really competing goals, and it can add to the tension or misconception about how the security tooling is working or what we need to see. Everyone might need a different picture. But again, sometimes that comes down to tuning. It could come down to, how is this tool actually configured to report the information to the right person? Am I sending a 300-page vulnerability report to a developer and asking them to just fix it all? That's probably not a good solution. So how can we tune and potentially fix some of these things to make that picture better for the actual audience, the people that are actually consuming the information? And again, that just takes additional configuration time, sometimes time we don't have. Alert fatigue. This is one of those things that has been studied really heavily, especially with SOCs, and not the socks that you wear, but for SOCS. I love that acronym. Anyway, so SOCs, that is their job, SOC analysts. They're constantly consuming information, looking at alerts, network traffic, EDR alerts, or is this malware? Did someone get phished? Was a file downloaded? Did someone exfiltrate data? They're constantly looking at all these different streams of data. When you see alerts all the time, you start to think, is that really an alert? Is that really anomalous? It's probably not that bad. Especially when you see, 99% of the time the traffic that you're seeing is probably okay. You might miss that 1% because it's like, oh my God, I'm looking at alerts all the time. There was a study done on alert fatigue, and it was on essentially how long a SOC analyst could look at a screen and get the actual context from the alerts that were coming through. And I think the cap was at like 15 or 20 minutes of the amount of time that you could actually sit and stare at the screen and get the right information out of it. And that'll be dependent on the person, right? Like some people might be able to take that information in for longer, some people for less. But imagine staring at that screen for 8 hours a day, every day, for years. Alert fatigue is a real thing. If you're constantly looking at alerts, you may miss something, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just how we as humans operate. Which is why job rotation, I think, is so important for SOCs. Not having them constantly look at alerts all day. Provide them something else to do, 6-month rotations or something like that to help give them a different picture before they can come back to looking at alerts. And then decision paralysis. So this is one of those things I just started looking into recently, because one of the things we do in cybersecurity in general, but especially when we're taking in all these streams of information from all these different security tools, we have to make a decision based on this information. when we have so much information, it can be difficult to make that decision, to say, is this anomalous behavior or is this expected? Because if you say this is anomalous behavior and you go ahead and start with an incident and you're wrong, you might be getting executive management involved, or you might be getting a customer involved in an incident that may or may not be happening. But then the opposite can be a problem too. If you make a decision too quickly, without the right context, you could also make the wrong decision in the wrong way. So decision paralysis is this sort of, oh my gosh, I've got so much information, I'm not sure what the right answer is, because now I'm taking in so much information, it's hard for me to sort of make that decision. I think the human factors piece and the psychological piece really of human factors, and human factors for anyone that just hasn't studied it in depth, I see a lot of research around human factors as security awareness training, and that's one piece of it, how do people learn? But the other piece of it is design. How do we build tools that are effective and help people be more efficient? Understanding engineering and psychological practices together. So it's one of those reasons why I think we need to sort of bring human factors into what we do as security practitioners. One, because I think it can help make our jobs a little bit easier, but I think understanding big problems like security tool sprawl and complexity, even just being aware of some of these things, we can build them into our programs and add a job rotation into SOCs maybe to help reduce alert fatigue or reduce missing, potentially major alerts. Okay, so to come back out of human factors a little bit, I asked this question because, when you start to think about how many tools you have in your own environment, the real question is, what do you need? What do you actually need? Do you have tools in place that, maybe you're getting information from, but maybe you don't log into that tool that much. Maybe you don't really need it that much, or maybe you're sort of getting the information from somewhere else. But you have to have some sort of vulnerability scanning in place. You have to have something in place to be able to understand what vulnerabilities do I have in my environment. That might be multiple tools. I think especially in multi-cloud environments or in on-premise and cloud environments, you might be able to extend a tool from on-prem to cloud, maybe not. It's going to be dependent on the environment. But to really help with that prioritization piece, because without it, it's just a ton of vulnerability information that you're staring at and trying to figure out what do I fix first? Endpoint detection and response, some way to contain a machine, some way to contain an endpoint that you suspect might be an issue or have an issue. That's something that you really need. You need some sort of alerting or capability to get a good picture of your environment of sort of what's going on or if something might be malicious. Real-time monitoring, so that you can have some type of continuous monitoring in place. So whether that's with a vulnerability scanning tool, you might have it with EDR, some sort of continuous monitoring and alerting happening. You might have to have another tool for that, depending on what your environment needs are. And then I should have put asset and software management at the top, because that really should come before your vulnerability scanning tool. But where and how are you managing your assets and your software libraries? Do you know what you have and where it is? Because without those, it's really difficult to get a good vulnerability management picture, but it's also really difficult to determine not only what vulnerabilities do I have, but what do I need to fix first? Okay, the other thing I wanted to bring up that again adds to this sort of big complexity picture, which is open source versus paid tooling. So chances are you've probably got a mix of both in your environments. There's a lot of really great open source tools out there to help if you have one picture with your sort of maybe your vulnerability scanner or something like that. You might have another tool in place that might help give you better context or better information. But multi-cloud environments, you might need to have external tools in both sets of environments. Not always. There are plenty of tools that can play in multi-cloud environments, but it's certainly about maybe finding those tools instead of managing maybe lots of tools across multiple cloud accounts or across multiple different types of cloud environments and on-prem. And then open source, again, it's another great potential area to get a better picture of your environment. but you're also, again, potentially increasing that attack surface depending on what type of tooling you're using. So if you're using something that isn't being patched or updated frequently, it could be its own vulnerable entity that you're sort of bringing into the environment too. So it's another one of those, you sort of have to weigh, am I getting better information from this versus increasing my attack surface? But it's another essentially component of how do I choose the right tools? What do I actually need in my environment? And what's worth it? What's worth it to have in the environment? So I wanted to introduce this. This is, it's pretty basic, but hopefully a good starting place for anyone that's got, maybe massive tools in your environment or lots of complexity in your environments. But to think about, sort of where you want to start. And once you've sort of gotten to the top, I'll go through each of these, but once you've sort of gotten to the top, to come back down to the bottom and start to evaluate again. We do continuous monitoring for vulnerabilities, for network traffic and alerting. Why don't we do continuous monitoring for our security tools? Why don't we continuously monitor them and see if they're working for us, if they're making sense for us, or if they're configured properly? Just like anything else, configurations can get changed or may need to be changed depending on how the environment is. I always use something as simple as if you have, Windows 10 and Windows 11, you may need to change, if you have a vulnerability scanner in place, you might have to change your policies to make sure that you're accounting for any of the changes in Windows 11 versus Windows 10. PowerShell monitoring, that may change dependent on what version of PowerShell that you have in the environment. So again, it should be this continuation, this iterative approach to security tooling where you're sort of asking yourself, is this still valuable? And if it's not valuable, why? Is it because I haven't had enough time to spend on it? Or is it because it really doesn't meet our business needs anymore? We're moving to multi-cloud environments. We need a tool that works for both. This just isn't going to work anymore. So it's really just sort of about asking that question and making sure that we do this over time. So starting with something like EDR, right? That would sort of be the first place. You want to make sure that you've got something on your systems when you bring them online and making sure that they're being actively monitored. Some sort of vulnerability scanning, of course, and then some sort of network monitoring. Maybe that comes with EDR, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you need a separate tool for that. Compliance reporting and frameworks. I've seen a lot more, especially for environments that maybe go through regular audits. Maybe they have assessments or they're beholden to specific regulations. They might have to have a separate compliance tool or framework, something in place that they're actively monitoring. There are plenty of vulnerability scanning or vulnerability tools that come with that, but again, it's just additional configuration that will have to go into place. And then SaaS or DAST if you have complex development environments. And again, that's not all inclusive. There's lots of other application testing and, like I said, CI/CD pipelines and things like that that you have to consider. And then, are you getting to a place of talking about threat modeling and probably using the tools that you have in place to use for threat modeling, or potentially getting threat intelligence tools in your environment to, again, expand the view of the information that you have, but to also give you context for the information that you're getting. And then hopefully getting to a single pane of glass or something like XDR, which is extended detection and response, but hopefully giving you some single mechanism, or maybe one or two areas that you look for information versus 10 or 15 different places that you have to look for information. So hopefully that's the end state. You're getting to a place where you have this sort of consolidated tooling and monitoring, knowing that that's not always possible, but hopefully that's a good end state. But then always going back through that process and saying, okay, am I actually seeing the right vulnerabilities in the environment? Am I not? And going back through the steps. Okay, so my last bit here that I'm going to sort of talk about recommendations, and this is just, these are questions I ask myself all the time too. But when we're talking about complexity, and this is complexity both from the technical side and from the people and human perspective too. Take a comprehensive inventory of your tooling. That's open source and paid tooling. What are you paying for? How much are you paying for it? Is it working for you? But also, what open source tools do you have in your environment? And I mean, really talking to, if you're management, talking to your security people and saying, hey, what are you using? Like, what are you actually missing? Are you missing pieces that you're trying to fill the gap with open source tooling? Are we not providing you the right budget or tooling, to sort of go back and figure out what you need? Versus trying to come up with creative solutions or building tools to help give us that picture. So what do you have versus what are you missing? This is actually a really difficult question to answer because you don't know what you don't know. But I think that's why conferences like this are great, or actually talking to vendors and seeing what products are out there, because sometimes just having a conversation with someone can give you a better idea of, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. Let me go check that out and see if I can use this. And maybe it'll give you a better picture into your own environment. Vulnerabilities management is one of those things that, especially in, I keep mentioning complex development environments, but that's because vulnerability management is getting more complex. It's increasingly complex because without the right tools in place, it might look like an application is secure. You might run a tool and it's like, oh yeah, this is fine. But it might not be. You could run another tool and get 150 findings. And it might be because you didn't have the right tool for that specific application or that specific library to actually see those things. So determining, okay, do I have the right tools for the actual application infrastructure that I have? And then the big question, are you really missing functionality, or are they not fully configured? I really recommend, this is one of those things I do all the time, where I go back and I look at tools and say, one, am I getting the best picture? And two, if I'm missing information, can I do it with this tool? Is there something I'm missing from the management console or from the actual visibility it has to different systems? Maybe because my asset inventory isn't quite right, I'm not getting a good picture of what's actually going on to actually determine the risk in my environment. So I highly recommend taking a look at your tools, seeing how well they're configured, and spending some time with them. And I say skill sets because something like Splunk, I am not an expert in Splunk by any means. That is something I would need to take time to really, really learn. I understand basic rule sets, things like that, but I think to configure a really complex tool like that, I would need training. I would need to go and spend a week and really dive deep into it to understand how it would best serve me in my environment. So taking that back to the teams, do the teams have, if you're using like a vulnerability scanner, do they really know how to configure it? Or did they sort of inherit it and they're managing it? Configuration and operations and management are sort of two different things. So if you're handed a tool, you're not quite sure how to manage it, it could be worth it to go take that upskilling and say, I'm not quite sure, I need to go figure out how this tool really works, how it's actually configured, because that might give again, another clue as to why it's configured that way. Maybe I'm missing something, and maybe how to configure it properly. And then for practitioners, I think having really good conversations with management about saying, this is what we have right now. This is what I'm able to provide to you as, an architect and engineer. This is what we have. I can't give you this information, or I can't prioritize vulnerabilities because I don't have this. This is something I need to be able, if you want a better picture, or you want to see vulnerabilities in any sort of prioritized way, not just criticals and highs, to help open that picture up. And the same for management. I encourage management to actually go talk to their practitioners and say, okay, this is the information you're giving me. Is this everything? Is this really what we need? Do I need more information? Am I missing something here? I think those conversations help to alleviate some of the perception that I was talking about before. Perception can be one of those things that, especially when it comes to security tooling or choosing the right tool or not, I think it can be really challenging to make sure that management understands that there might be things under the covers of the actual tool that they don't get to see because they just see a report or they just see a dashboard. They don't get to actually see all the configuration and time that goes into make sure that that tool gives the right information. So I encourage those sort of iterative approaches to those conversations, because the information you need is going to change over time too. It'll probably change day to day. But hopefully, at least starting those conversations can help to give at least a picture of, okay, this is what we really have, this is what we don't have, and this is what we need versus this is nice to have. And hopefully that, again, will help to bring that understanding back to, from management to practitioners on, I know I can't have everything, but if you really want everything, this is really what we need to give that idea. So I really wanted to leave plenty of time for questions. That's really my presentation on complexity and security tooling, and happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. Oh, thanks. Thank you. I think, did I see? Oh. Oh, hi. Yes, totally. Thank you for that. Yes, that is totally one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because conversations between developers and security, or IT and security, I can say this because I was IT operations for about 11 years before I got into security, so I've had those conversations from both sides of the fence, and I know that they can be challenging, or that there can be tension and friction between teams, mostly because you have competing goals. A developer is worried about their 2-week sprint cycle, or they're worried about, hey, I have to deliver this on this date. And, maybe my bonus or my pay is dependent on this, or my job. Maybe I'm worried about my job. If I can't deliver I'm worried about job security. And so as security practitioners, I think that's one of our jobs when we're working with developers or IT in any capacity, is to lead with empathy. That's always one of the things, another piece of that psychological component, but to listen to what's actually going on with them. And so when we provide a vulnerability report, to not provide them that 300-page report. I like to start with the top 5. That's usually my recommendation, is start with the top 5 and say, here's the 5 things we have to fix in the next 2 sprints. This is what we have to do now. Because if you overload them with vulnerabilities, it's sort of like, what am I going to do with this? I don't have time for this. This is going to slow me down. It's going to break my product, all these things. And so I think if you can open that conversation with, hey, here's the report, but here's the top 5 things we need to do, and I'm going to help you do that. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for the talk. Just given your experience and your perspective, what is your take on things like standardized rule languages like Sigma rules?
Like that, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Sigma rules, it's a tool-agnostic language for writing behavioral-based detection. So I can literally convert built into this backend. You write it in the Sigma YAML format, it goes into Splunk, it goes into Sentinel-1, and all of the
No, that sounds awesome. That sounds like something I need to go to a week for training for. No, but that sounds awesome. I love that if it's tool agnostic, or if you're able to actually build that type of analysis in. I love that, because I guess it would depend on the solution, right? If you're able to have the right skill set, right, for people to be able to do that and know that you're not missing information, yeah, I think that's great. And you gave me something to research when I go home, so thank you.
I've heard really good things about its potential. The minor concern is that various nuances in block source formatting. They're trying to standardize all that, but complexity still remains for all the tools. So it's a good starting point, but not a be all. And also, is what I've heard.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
So you were going over the security tools for all, and there's 10, 15, however many. Do you think we'll ever come to a point where instead of just adding on, piling on, collapse some of the functions and then maybe narrow it down? Like you said, it worked.
Yeah. Yeah, so thank you for the question. Yes, I do think that we're going to get to a place like that. I think that is one of the problems that I think our industry is trying to solve. There are a lot of vendors out there that are trying to solve this problem, knowing that, hey, to do my job, I have to have 15 or 20 tools in my environment, and that's not a feasible solution, because we are humans. There's only so much information we can take in and actually digest and act on. That's the other piece, right, is that I can digest a lot of information. Yes. Yeah, they have a ton. Yeah, if you go to the website, they have a ton of different degrees and, like I said, different labs. And so, yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed my time there. That's why I'm still there. But yeah, they have a lot of cool degrees. Yeah. Yes.
You talked about human factors from the point of view of the operator. What about listening to management, like the no-blame culture from aerospace, to help make people more effective?
Yeah, so I think the human factors conversation from both the management perspective and the practitioner perspective is really important. I guess I focused more on the practitioner because I am a practitioner. But yeah, I think it's both ways, right? Really effective management, especially when it comes to a situation like this, isn't to say, you know, my security practitioners didn't configure this properly. This is their fault. You know, it's really about the question, did I provide them the training and the skilling to understand this tool, or did they get hired and I told them they need to figure it out today? So yes, absolutely. I think it's sort of has to be from both sides. And this idea of perception, this is something I just started exploring in the last year or two when it came to research, because I think perception, and I don't have any proof behind this yet, but my hypothesis is that perception affects a lot more in risk management and in burnout and things like that we're seeing in the industry than we are aware of at the moment. You know, if that perception is my security team is doing a bad job, that's going to be negative for everyone, right? Versus saying, what's actually happening on the team? Let me ask around. Let me ask a few questions. You know, do they know how to manage this tool? No? Can I send them to a week for training and fix the problem? Great. I don't have to fire someone and hire someone. That's bad for everybody. So yeah, absolutely, both ways. Yeah. Any other questions? No? All right, well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks. Have a good one.